with what's been going on in the first few months of Trump's presidency, um, everybody feels like, well, maybe the radical liberals were correct in 2016 when they kept saying Trump is a fascist, and that meme was going around. He's a fascist, a fascist. What say you to that, Daniel Bessner?
It's just kind of goofy a little bit, to be honest. There's just so much precedence in American history for basically everything that Trump is doing. I don't see the need to turn to a European political ideology from the middle of the 20th century, really the first, let's say the first, whatever, the middle of the 20th century, the 20s to the 40s, to understand what's going on. I don't think it really illuminates anything. I don't think the sort of checklist approach to fascism really makes sense. Like, these bad things Trump is doing are fascist, again, just because there's such obvious precedent in American history. So I don't think it's strange that people are so attached to it. I don't understand why. I understand if it's like a political thing and people like really using it to identify a far right thing that they think is really bad. But in terms of an analytical framework, I don't think it really adds much. I don't think you need it to understand Trump. I don't think it pushes in the right direction of how Trump is actually using the authoritarian power of the American presidency and the American state to do various things that we on the left disagree with. I don't think it works as a category.
Kuba?
Well, there's, and this is one place where I part ways with some of the, America's always been racist. America's always had bad foreign policy. Mm-hmm. America's always been authoritarian, and even that Jon Stewart take that this isn't fascism. These are powers that Donald Trump legally holds. There is a break between the exercise of his authority in this second term than what he was doing in his first term. Mm-hmm. And there might be similarities between mass deportations and the Bracero program under Eisenhower, mm-hmm. or and certainly if you go back into the 19th century, you can find countless examples of hideous human rights violations and hideous abuses by purportedly democratic constitutional governments of the United States on a genocidal scale. However, the question is one significant question, which I think his conduct raises right now, is whether the constitutional order is still operative in the sense of, well, will there be a third Trump term? Well, do the regular constitutional procedures and standards that are supposed to be as much a defining element of the American political order as all of the bad stuff that we talked about, are those even functional anymore? After all, if a person inside the United States can be, without any due process, in the light of day and against a court order, disappeared, vanished, thrown into a foreign detention center, a concentration camp, without any recourse, even the courts not being able to impose their verdict on the operations of the state. Well, that is something different. That is something that is a discontinuity. And frankly, I think that one
Kuba,
way...
you didn't read my article.
I skimmed it.
Yeah, you didn't read my article. There's many, many examples of that in the last 30 years. I mean, I think the thing that you could actually do is say there's very clearly a difference between Trump 1 and Trump 2. I think it would be foolish and ignorant to claim otherwise. What he's basically doing is taking the theory of the unitary executive to its logical conclusion. That is the, I think, intensification that Trump actually represents, is that this theory, which is the idea that only the president has the legal right to interpret.
No, I'm familiar with it. John Yoo, the entire war on terror.
Yeah, I'm explaining it to listeners. Yeah, so the theory is that there's two major points to it. One, which is that only the executive has the right to interpret congressional constitutional legislation with regards to the executive branch, and that only executive has the right to interpret judicial orders with relation to the executive branch. That's the difference. The disappearances, the vanishings have happened repeatedly throughout American history. It's just that people are now, I mean, as Adam Goodman wrote in his book, The Deportation Machine, you could just trace this. It's happened to legal residents, it's happened to citizens, mostly happened to Mexicans. So it wasn't of first order importance to the people who were paying attention to this. But I think that the genuine thing, the genuine discontinuity, and it's really kind of more of a continuity, is this intensification of this theory of the unitary executive, which was very dangerous, which has been used for 30 years now by the Republican legal establishment. And that's a real problem. And so I think that's what we need to focus on. And really, then we're getting into the problem of the presidency itself, which is a very problematic institution to the degree where I think we've actually been in a low-level constitutional crisis since 1942. It's just that it's, as you know, it's been in relation to foreign relations and national security. Congress hasn't declared war since 1942. It's a constitutional crisis. The United States obviously has gone to war many, many times since then, but nobody's been paying attention. So what we have here is this low-level constitutional crisis coming home and the intensification of the theory of the unitary executive. That's what's going on. That has nothing to do with fascism.
So tell me, describe fascism then.
I could describe it in its interwar context. I could describe it as sharing a family resemblance with far-right authoritarian ideologies. But the sort of relevant context for fascism, which is World War I, not theories, gangs of veterans roaming the streets with combat experience, the genuine crisis of capitalism to the degree where the hyperinflation of early post-war Europe, the concatenation of factors that led to the emergence of an entirely new political order that many people within Germany and Italy didn't find legitimate. I would say a state form that is actually bureaucratically immature and is able to be taken over in a genuine way. I go against most people here. I don't think that Trump has yet demonstrated he's been able to totally take over the American state. I don't think that's happened yet. And then you have sort of these inter-imperial rivalries of the early 20th century. None of those, I would say, core features of fascism hold today. What you have is a far-right ideology in fascism that, like all far-right ideologies, far-right ideology in fascism, a far-right ideology today, and there's obvious family resemblances because far-right ideologies have family resemblances, just like liberal ideologies have family resemblances and left-wing ideologies have family resemblances. But what's happening here is a uniquely American thing, I would argue, linked very peculiarly to American institutions in the context of the United States in the 2020s. So I don't understand what doing fascism gets you. Oh, and then one more thing. Fascism is also an ideology of a mass political era, which is very much not the era we live in today. Sorry.
Well, I think that one way in which the concept of fascism might be operative here is that among Trump and among his supporters and advisors, I think they see a playbook in how the Weimar Republic was undone and how the party state of the Third Reich was established. I don't think that it's a coincidence that certain institutions and certain professions, certain power centers outside of the state, things like the constitutional law firms that have been one of the major whipping boys of the Trump administration and have been forced to submit to extravagant sanctions from the government in order to continue.
That's far-right ideology. This is what far-right governments do, right? If you're going to make the claim to fascism, it has to be actually linked to fascism, as opposed to a general family resemblance.
Distinguish far-right ideology from fascism, right? Yeah. I think that you're right that a lot of far-right ideologies have family resemblances, and I don't know. Flipping it on its head, I don't know what the delineation of saying that this is a uniquely American form of far-right authoritarianism that has nothing to do with fascism. I don't know what that gets you either.
Because you diagnosing something actually helps you to identify a cure. And understanding this is emergent from American institutions and the American context is the only way that we're actually going to be able to combat it. Relating it to a mass political form of the 1920s and 1930s, Italy and Germany, is just not going to give us any sort of insight into actually how to combat Trump. That's why I think it's important. It's so different.
So tell me, how do you combat Trump?
I think you actually have to start building. Okay. Sorry, I think you have to rein in the power of the presidency. I mean, this is the big problem of American history. I think you have to start building a generational project. Basically, I mean, if you have to ask me honestly, I don't think we're going to do it. I think that that ship has sailed, and we've probably lost. But if you're going to say that if we have given us strategy,
then we're at the exact same place as the people who misdiagnose it according to fascism, right? You
pessimism
don't have any cure at all, whereas in theory they would have the wrong cure. But what if their diagnosis produces a more useful?
It hasn't. It hasn't. I think that was also the political language of the Kamala Harris campaign the last couple of weeks, and I just think people don't buy it because Americans aren't stupid and they understand that things are different. What I would do, I mean, pessimism of the intellect, I don't think we're going to do it. Optimism of the will, I think we basically have to center the presidency as a problematic institution. I think that there is a serious problem in the separation of powers in this country, that Congress has essentially abdicated its responsibility on a number of issues related specifically to war, immigration, and national security. And I also think that there's been an oligarchic concentration of power in the upper capitalist class. So those are the two major problems facing our country, which again, don't really have anything to do with interwar fascism. Okay. So I would say focus on those problems. Develop strategy. At first, identify those as the problems, not fascism, and then start building a political coalition over time to rein in the presidency and rein in the power of oligarchic capitalism. Again, pessimism of the intellect, don't think that's going to happen. Optimism of the will, that's a place that we would need to focus on.
Okay, so I would see things differently. I think that they're in the establishment and the entrenchment of right-wing authoritarianism under a far-right ideology, call it fascism, call it not fascism, call it Amero-fascism. There's certain steps, there's certain processes that need to take place before you can disappear people just collectively with impunity, before you can call off elections, these kinds of things. And
we've been disappearing people for decades, though. I just really need to underline that. We've been disappearing people for, I would say, the modern era of immigration begins in the late 1920s with the deportation of, I have the exact number in my article, but it's hundreds of thousands of Mexican and Mexican Americans forcibly deported. So I would say there's been a modern deportation machine, to borrow the term of the historian Adam Goodman, for a century, in which citizens and legal residents, usually Mexicans, usually Latin Americans, have been swept up. So I just want to underline that as something that's been happening for about a century.
Okay. There's also been the wartime internment of the Japanese, and
the term now is incarceration. Just everyone listening, the term that now scholars use is incarceration. By the way, implemented by executive order by FDR. FDR was the one who did 3,700 executive orders. I think 37,921, if I'm getting it correctly. Orders of magnitude over. Now, obviously, we all agree with what FDR was doing because he did it for good and not for ill. But that's a problem when people govern through the executive branch, which has been going on since the New Deal.
Okay, so sure, you can.
So I just have to address a comment in the comment that Prester John says Nazis learned Jim Crow, reservations, internment camps, forced labor, eugenics, mass surveillance, mass genocide from the U.S. That is incorrect. That is a form of American negative exceptionalism. The Nazis, when they came to the Nuremberg laws, apparently did look, according to the book Hitler's American Model by James Q. Whitman, actually quite a short book, that has become the center of the American left for some reasons, interpretation of Nazi Germany. There's plenty of precedent in European history for the genocide of European Jewry. And I think that Americans need to be careful not to center themselves in the story of the Holocaust. It's wrong. It's empirically wrong. It's historically wrong. And it actually, I think, dishonors the people who did die in the Holocaust. And people need to be careful about extending the argument of Whitman into something that I don't think he ever intended, to make basically the United States responsible for the Holocaust, which just is not accurate. Sorry, Kuba. I just wanted to address that comment.
No, so my concern, or rather, you have you've observed like very deep structural constitutional problems as the foundation for this abuse of power, or this negative use of power, whatever you want to call it, by Donald Trump, right? As just an extension of things that have always taken place. The fact that everything is taking place out in the open, and that there's been such a brazen defiance of court orders, of federal judgments, that level of impunity, well, the fact that it's visible, the fact that it's overt, does represent something new, and does represent something extremely disturbing, because previous administrations have at least made the effort
They
of
haven't been as
concealing
public
information.
about it. Yeah, they
Yes,
haven't.
absolutely.
The difference is they haven't been as
Absolutely.
public about it. Yeah, that's
Absolutely. And there's a
absolutely the
very
case. True.
and that is a very big difference, right? The what is conducted in secrecy and what is concealed away from not just the general public, but also opposition elements within the ruling elite. It's precisely because there are avenues to block those types of actions that they're concealed, right? That there might be electoral or a reaction from within the legal establishment, from within the judiciary, from within other elements of the governing apparatus. And that division of powers is supposed to be a feature, that checks and balances, call it what you will, is supposed to be a feature that limits the ability for this kind of presidential unilateral extension of authority, right? Extra constitutional abuse of authority, let's say. And what's extraordinary and what is fascist like in the second term of Donald Trump is the fact that this has become overt, and that there's an attempt to try to collapse the contradiction in favor of an unapologetic, untrammeled, limitless exercise of executive authority. And not only that, but build up a cadre that's able to use force at the unilateral behest of the executive, and purge the judiciary, purge the federal bureaucracy, purge the security agencies of those who might go along with the watered down version of this, but object to the
Yeah,
full calorie
yeah.
Coca-Cola.
I think it's a fair point. Just a very quick thing. I can have to address the comments. Look up the Herero and Nama genocide, which was prosecuted by Germans in German Southwest Africa. It's actually the first genocide of the 20th century. Okay, so yes, Kuba. I think it's a little bit early days to be making those claims. Basically, Elon Musk is co-president. All of a sudden, he can't be seen. Right. So that is my basic claim. I think we have to wait and see what actually happens before we start making those maximalist claims. Although we should, like you said, pay attention to them.